There is no such ethnicity named a color out of Crayola's coloring crayon box. There's no such ethnicity as black. There's no such ethnicity as white. There is no such ethnicity as brown or yellow or blue or green or purple or rainbow. There is no such thing as the black race, the white race, a brown race. You know what there is? Take me for example. Yes, I get it when people look at me and say, "Oh, you're a white guy," right? I'm not actually white. I'm kind of pink, technically, if you want to get technically speaking here with the colors in the box of Crayola crayons. I'm more along the lines of pink. But what is my race? My ethnicity is Celtic. I'm not white, I'm Celtic. Now if you're black, and you think of yourself as a black person, get rid of that. You're not black. What are you? What is your race? What is your ethnicity? Nigerian? Nairobian? Ethiopian? What is it? Okay? Call yourself that. I don't call myself white. I call myself by my ethnicity, which is Celtic. 95% of it anyway is Celtic in origin. That's not white. If you're a German, you're not white. That's not your race. You're German. You're of the Germanic tribes. If you're an Anglo-Saxon, you're not white. You're an Anglo-Saxon. You're a Saxon. If you're Asian, you're not yellow. You're Chinese. You're Japanese. You're Taiwanese, Korean, what have you. If you're Muslim, oh, now that's a race, somehow. I don't know. Doesn't make any sense, of course, but apparently that's a race. Yeah, right. Well, if you're a Muslim, you're not a Muslim ethnicity. You don't have a Muslim ethnicity. You're Arab. You might be African. You might be from an ethnic African culture, or a Middle Eastern culture. You might be Persian. You might be Afghani. You might be, I think I already mentioned Arab. Okay. You might even be Jew. You might even be Jewish. Again, make a distinction between your race and or ethnicity and the crayons in the coloring box. They're not the same thing at all. Once you get that through your head, it's a lot easier to talk about race. It's a lot easier to talk about racial divisions, racial issues, and institutional racism, which is one of the things I wanted to cover today. Now, when you're talking about race, it's pretty obvious that today in the media and in government and in society in general, it's white man bashing time, okay? The white men alive today had nothing to do with racism. I'm sorry, it had nothing to do with slavery in this country. We weren't even here. But somehow we're to blame for all the racism and, all the crime in the black community. I saw a YouTube video in which this young, very pretty actually, black lady was confronting a white guy. I think he was Chechnyan, he said. So he wasn't actually white, he was Chechen, right? Well, she was confronting him and she was telling him about his white privilege, and that white privilege doesn't mean that you have an easy life. It just means that the system is set up for you to succeed and for her people, in other words, black people, to fail. And the time period that she was addressing in the context of this conversation was around the 80s. Because she was challenging this guy to name a time in American history where America was great for anyone except for white people. As if it's always been great for white people and only for white people. It's never been great for anyone else. Well, let's look at the 80s. Let's look at the... screw it, let's go from the 60s into the present. You are going to tell me that institutional racism has caused, and white privilege being a system set up to make white people succeed and black people fail, you're telling me that people like Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, LeBron James, you're telling me that all of the famous, hardworking athletes, black athletes, actors, musicians, artists, sports figures, politicians, CEOs, historians, authors, you're telling me that of all those immensely successful black people, that they're all failures because of the system of white privilege? Something tells me that if you were to tell that nonsense to them, any one of them would tell you to go shove it up your ass. Because they've worked hard, they're black, they haven't been oppressed, they've made huge successes of themselves. So, you can't very well take that fact and have it match up to these liberal social justice warrior, minority protective mentality. It doesn't match up. The facts don't match with their worldview. But I'm beginning to think, and I'm beginning to see more and more how facts don't really matter. In fact, there's a lot of these alternative facts coming out. Now, think about this. What does that phrase actually mean? Alternative facts. Well, if you have some alternative to the facts, then those alternatives aren't facts, are they? No, they're probably lies. Make sense? So there's a buzzword that makes absolutely no sense, that is designed to get a person with the facts to not use them in their argument. Well, fuck that. I use facts. And the fact is that in the United States, in the entire history of slavery in the United States, there were less than 500,000 African slaves. Less than 500,000 in the entire history of slavery in the United States. You can take that fact to the bank. Now, another fact. The United States was the second Western nation, right behind Britain, to abolish slavery. So you can't tell me that there's institutional racism and white privilege that's designed to make whites succeed and blacks fail. You know what, though? I do agree that there is institutional racism. It's called affirmative action. It's directed primarily against white males. But somehow that's not racism? Excuse me, from where I stand, it pretty much looks like blatant racism. Against me. And other people that look like me. That have the same values I have. Here's another little fun fact these libtards never seem to grasp. In the Arabic Islamic world, and we're not talking about the entire Islamic world, we're specifically focusing on Arabs. Now, since the time of Muhammad, Arabs have been notoriously racist against Africans, against black Africans. In fact, there are 20 million black African slaves in actual chains being worked to death in the Arabic Islamic world, not 1,000 years ago, not 100 years ago, but on April 17th, 2017, today. So you get 500,000 African slaves 150 some odd years ago versus, in the United States, versus 20 million actual African slaves in the Arab Islamic world today. And somehow that fact is overlooked, glossed over, shoved under the rug so that we can focus exclusively on the white man's racism in the United States and the white man's oppression of blacks. Well, sorry, I'm getting sick of it. It's bullshit, and I think many of you purveyors of this idea know that it's bullshit, and I'm calling you out.